welcome also to Tom Slater, still with us, editor of Spiked Online. And also, you may have seen, actually, we've also been having Tom Tugendhat, one of the Tory candidates for the Tory leadership. Obviously, he's been giving his big campaign launch. We had a couple yesterday, Kemi Badenoch, we had James Cleverly, last week Priti Patel. I've lost track of any other one over the weekend. I can't remember. I don't think the British nation is paying that much attention. Do you think, Tom? Even to the other Tom. But what's interesting is Tom Tugendhat is doing it in what looks like a former church or some sort of in Westminster, and has a sort of a yellow, like, it looks like a halo behind his head. I don't know what the subliminal messaging is there and whether that's working. It's not the biggest story in town, but let's just start with that. Tory leadership, runners and riders, 6 today. Tomorrow, the hustings, the Tory MPs, you know, ragtag, but about a dozen of them left, and they're going to have the hustings there. They put their case, and then there's going to be the first vote, going to get down to 5. Word is, no offence, Mel Stride, that he might well be the first to fall by the wayside. It's going to be whittled down to 4 before party conference. It goes on and on and on. It goes past the budget to November the 2nd, when, frankly, we're all going to be busy watching the American election, not who's going to be leader of the opposition for the next few years here in the UK. But do you have any idea who you think you want it to be, or who you think it should be or will be?
Well, it's difficult to tell, insofar as at the moment it's very much the Tory party having a conversation with itself.
Yeah.
There's also always a big difference between what the parliamentary party think is an appropriate candidate and what the membership think is the appropriate candidate. So all of that is to come, I suppose. I mean, on certain issues that I care about, whilst I'm not a Tory member, I don't really have a
I don't think they're for
dog in
you.
this race, shall
No.
we say. I think Kemi Badenoch is an interesting proposition on taking the culture war quite seriously. I think she quite rightly recognises that these issues aren't a kind of frippery, if you're talking about freedom of speech, women's rights and so on. But there are questions about her credentials or her views beyond those questions, which I think it's fair to say. I'm slightly struck and interested in the fact that Tom Tugendhat seems to be doing a campaign which is drawing in voices and support from members of more of the kind of Tory right, which I think would suggest that he's really kind of odds on to try and be presented as almost the kind of left or more centrist candidate.
Although interesting, you say Robert Jenrick was someone who was considered on the left. He's very much a Rishi Sunak loyalist and has garnered an awful lot of right-wing support. It's interesting also Robert Jenrick commenting on our next big topic, of the major topic of the day, really, on the British suspending arms exports to Israel and the timing of that announcement from David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, but also just being very critical of it.
Jenrick's an interesting one as well, because he was put in the Home Office by Rishi Sunak to keep an eye on Suella Braverman. And yet he went sort of native in a fascinating way. He became increasingly right-wing, certainly in his rhetoric on issues of immigration, multiculturalism, the hate marches and so on. And there are still questions amongst sections of the Tory right whether he is actually the real deal, whether this Damascene conversion is legit and so on. But he's an interesting one who, at the very least, whether it's really died in the wool for him or not, I think he recognises that that's where a lot of the energy in Tory politics is at the moment. It's more with the right of the party, certainly more debate going on that section.
Well, also you've got the challenge, you know, the people who went to Reform UK, 4.5 million or so, and you've got the people who sat at home largely because they think the party wasn't to the right again. And again, it's not to the right, just being Conservative. The Conservative Party has, in the last few years, to all intents and purposes, been Labour light, and that's why people desert them. We'll get to that. Lots more to talk about on that issue, but let's talk about the main issue of the day, and the question I'm actually putting to you on the show today. Israel has accused Britain of rewarding Hamas, this after the Foreign Secretary David Lammy announced yesterday that some arms exports licences will be suspended to Israel. It is only 30 of 350 arms export licences. Realistically, Tom, it's pretty... You know, it's a lot less. It's like 0.02% of the arms imports that Israel has. Vast majority come to the US. It's less than 1%. The question I'm asking is, you know, what your reaction is to this. You can give us a call 0344 499 1000 to send a WhatsApp to the same number. You can text on 87222. Get in touch on X at TalkTV. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text costs £1 standard network rate message. We'll get to more of your calls and a lot of your messages coming in as well. But Tom Slater, I mean, was this about a genuine concern, as David Lammy says, that there is, his words, after 2 months review and legal advice, that there is, quote, a clear risk that UK weapons might be used to commit a serious violation of international humanitarian law? Or was this gesture politics of the worst kind on the worst possible day, when the people of Israel were a nation in grief, coming together to watch the burial of 6 hostages shot dead in cold blood by their Hamas hostage takers just over the weekend?
On the one hand, it is gesture politics. There's a bit of a whiff of the student union about it. It's a bit like when Oxford, Students' Union or something would pass some motion condemning the Israeli government as if that's going to make the Knesset shake as a consequence.
As opposed to worrying about, the cost of rent for the students.
Absolutely. There's a bit of a whiff of that to it. But at the same time, it's not insignificant. I mean, this is part of a drumbeat towards this with the government, dropping its objections to the ICC arrest warrants against Netanyahu, and the Defence Minister Yoav Gallant is also resuming funding for UNRWA, despite it being quite credibly accused of harbouring participants in October the 7th.
Not just supporters, but people who literally went into Israel and grabbed hostages.
Absolutely, with a very long and checkered history in terms of how it operates in Gaza as well. And now this, which again was expected, but it sends a really stark message, which is to say that Israel is essentially illegitimate in the way in which it's defending itself and it's conducting this war. That has consequences, even if it doesn't have a material consequence on the ground, because you're talking about a fraction of a tiny fraction of the support.
And again, that's the thing, is Israel is winning the ground war in that sense, but they're certainly not winning the international PR war, and the ability of Hamas to get most of the Western media to believe everything they say. I mean, God, mind you, you've got Western media that think, that men are women and up is down. I mean, so no wonder they can believe that, Hamas, when Hamas say, oh, it's only innocent children who died, what, apart from all the blokes with the guns who came out of the tunnels? I mean, again and again, it's a Hamas say, and then it is claimed by the Israeli Foreign Ministry. They ascribe sort of truth, tablets from heaven, to anything that Hamas say. It's quite extraordinary, isn't it? But I mean, an interesting piece I was quoting earlier from Jake Wallace-Simons from the Jewish colonies over in Israel at the moment, and we spoke to a guest earlier who's in Israel as well. But over the last 3 years, Britain has sold $3 billion of weapons to Qatar, almost $2 billion to Saudi Arabia. They've sold hundreds of millions, 800 million to Turkey, almost $500 million to United Arab Emirates. I mean, don't seem to have any issue. I mean, some of those are perpetrating blatant wars, like in Yemen with Saudi Arabia, blatantly, openly supporting, Sunni jihadism and supporting Hamas, indeed, in the case of Qatar. And yet no one seems to have an issue with that. Don't worry. Little kids and women dying in Yemen, not a problem. That's absolutely fine. That's fine. But carry on selling weapons. There won't be marches on the streets every other week in London. There won't be flags being waved, Yemen flags being waved everywhere. But in Palestine, for Palestinians in Gaza, no, they matter. Now, of course, those lives matter. No one normal, i.e. no one other than Hamas and other lunatic jihadists want innocent people to die in Israel, but in Gaza. But as you said, Tom, they have enough space in those tunnels. Hamas fighters are hiding in them. Why don't they let the civilians hide in them too, if they want to save people from being bombed by the Israelis? It does seem to me that Israel alone is being picked up on this, alone is being held to a standard not just higher than we hold jihadist groups, or higher than we hold, dictatorships like Qatar and Saudi Arabia. We're holding them to a higher account than we hold our own military.
And it's worth noting what a shift this is as well, because there's obviously always been a section of the supposedly anti-imperialist left which was very noisily against Israel, against the whole Zionist project and so on, and who would oppose any cooperation with them whatsoever, regardless of the government and regardless of what they were doing. What has been quite disconcerting about this current conflict, amongst many things, is the way in which the kind of mid-wit liberal elite opinion, of which Keir Starmer is a perfect exponent, I think, has turned quite decisively against Israel. The sort of James O'Brien tendency, the kind of New European reader, that kind of section of society, which previously might have been tempted to at least be kind of a bit annoyingly even-handed on this conflict, has turned quite decisively in an anti-Israel direction.
We're told there's more people in favour of this move. It's like, these are people who don't understand. I mean, I'm not saying people are ignorant. I'm just saying that, people say, every single night you see images of children being pulled out of the rubble in Gaza. Of course you want that war to end. We all want that war to end. It can end today. Hamas can give up all the hostages and lay down their weapons, and then the war ends. Done. The people of Gaza can live in what could be again, like a Tel Aviv type holiday resort where they could all have brilliant lives and jobs if they decided to not take up weapons against Israel again. That option is open to them. They choose not to take it. I don't understand. There is no circumstance where, if what had happened on October 7th had happened to us or America or any other country, that anyone would expect us to show the level of the level of concern for the enemy's civilians, which is how they'll be seen in war, than Israel has showed. It defies. It absolutely defies belief for me that is the case. But I don't know. I just find it really depressing that people think this is such a simple thing. And if you've gone on a march about the kids in Gaza, but you haven't even given a thought to kids in Yemen, or you never really cared about the Yazidi people, or you don't really care about who died in Mosul, civilians in Mosul, when we were carpet bombing Mosul to deal with the Islamic threat there, then I'm sorry, you just don't know enough about this.
There's
to have an opinion.
There is a huge part of that. I think there's also ignorance about the nature of Israeli society. A lot of people within Gaza within Israel, I should say, are very concerned about the people in Gaza. A lot of the people who were targeted on October 7th in the south, who lived next to the border, were peace activists.
Yes.
And those voices are completely erased from this discussion, this very black and white way in which the conflict is talked about in the West, I think.
Yeah, but of course it's an apartheid state. Remember that.
All of these slurs
are just
and these distortions.
If anyone uses the phrase the apartheid state, or they talk about genocide, they instantly discount and say you're literally just using memes from the internet. You're not even, you don't know what you're talking about. There are completely valid opinions on both sides. That's not one of them.